I've heard you mention that over time Okinawa has evolved and adapted as any country would. How do you see Okinawa changing over time, and how is it today that perhaps is changing in a way that is decreasing the old style karate?
One, I think the pipeline, as I call it, of students or folks going to Okinawa with a view towards serious study. The pipeline is narrowing, certainly on the military side. Probably the best students outside of Okinawans to come to Okinawa to train were the Americans, the American military. Because when they got there, they were in good shape, they were military-minded, they had a warrior mindset, they were used to training with long hours, discomfort, and they were also used to, when someone said do this, they were used to doing it, no questions asked. That pipeline is shrinking based on worldwide deployments for the military. The Marines are moving in large part to Guam, and the folks who are still on Okinawa are either on their way to Afghanistan or going back to the States to be outfitted. And so the actual number of potential students is much smaller than it once was, and that's not going to stop. So when you take the Marines from the island, you also take their sons and daughters and dependents who are also good students. So that pipeline has also gone away. One of the other difficulties is that Okinawa is the 47th prefecture of Japan, but it's also the poorest economically. And so they've had to find some way, and Japan is not really invested in that prefecture the way it has the other 46. The Japanese have tried to make Okinawa a place for tourism. So the Okinawans looked around and asked, well, what do we have that might be of interest to tourists? And it turned out to be karate as one of them. So there's an organization called the Rengokai, which is the governing body for karate on Okinawa. It is now run by an excellent businessman, a gentleman named Aragaki. And they're the promoters of the World Tournament, which in and of itself was quite an undertaking. But what we now see is that it's still skewed towards tourism. When folks come to Okinawa, they fill the hotels, they rent the cars, they do all the tourist shopping, all of those things. Obviously, they're buying airline tickets back and forth. They're buying other merchandise to take home. But all of that is focused on a tournament, which no serious master on Okinawa would confuse with real karate. So the ultimate aim of all of that activity is something that many folks feel is just not the Okinawan way. So you have a group of folks who are not members of the Rengokai, who are not satisfied with the direction. So even among the Okinawans, you see this a split. It's been there for a long time, but it's coalesced with the actual conduct of the World Tournament, which is never going to go away because the Japanese were invested in that. Right. The actual place where it's held, the Budokan, was built with Japanese government money. So yeah, there is that split.
Well, speaking of tournaments, you mentioned that you used to actively participate. Is that still a part of what you do, as perhaps refereeing or participation, or have you sort of phased that out of your personal life?
I have phased it out completely. I always saw it as a phase, that it was not the real art. And like most folks coming back from Okinawa, I was disqualified from my first several tournaments because I simply fought in the tournaments the way I was trained on Okinawa. And then people started saying, you can't do that, but isn't this a karate tournament? Yeah, but not really. You know? But we do something else here. When I first came back, of course, you didn't really have protective equipment. We used a certain kind of gear on Okinawa, but only to protect vital points. Then we started to see safety kick, safety punch, and you needed that for liability reasons in tournaments. But it certainly took a lot of the fun out of tournaments for me.
For you, not your opponent?
No. But of course, the competition is so rule-bound, and I watched folks get so invested in the rules themselves, as opposed to the quality of the karate. The personalities became involved. There was seeding involved. If you had won a series of championships, you just showed up with your magic cape on, and you just walked into the finals. And I thought that doesn't work that way. So I phased through that, and I have no connection with tournaments now. My efforts now are towards trying to transmit what my teacher passed in the 60s and 70s, which I don't think is being taught anymore in Okinawa.
You became known for your usage of the sai as one of your focus weapons. What drew you to the sai, or is there even a difference for you? Is that just one that happens to have gotten noticed, and in your mind they're all fairly equal for you?
What drew me to the sai was my teacher's expertise with it. That it seemed really an excellent weapon. It did a couple of things. It not only taught you defense and offense, it strengthens the body because you're holding two metal truncheons, one in each hand. It was a traditional weapon on Okinawa. It was people. If you look up the history, there are some who say it was introduced from countries like Malaysia, and the Okinawans will say no, we kind of tweaked it, made it our own. So it's tied to the Okinawan culture. It's also a farming instrument, implement as well. If I did anything with it during my tournament phase, one of the reasons I used the sai was because no one else really understood what it was at the time or how it was used. Or they were either holding it the wrong way or using it the wrong way. I said, let me at least show how the Okinawans teach it. And that seemed to catch some eyes. And the next thing I saw were people using these super lightweight aluminum chrome barrel size, little holes in them so they whistle. And again, it kind of moves you away from wanting to be lined up at a tournament with 18 of those guys and one of you, with a weapon that you actually had made on Okinawa and brought back with you. So,
one of the other influences that you had was on the Marine Corps martial arts program during its early development. How exactly were you involved with that, and what was your ideas that you brought from your background?
I got a call from a gentleman who took a couple of my seminars. At the time, he was Master Sergeant Carter Urso. He subsequently was promoted to Master Gunnery Sergeant, which is the highest enlisted grade. And he said, the Commandant of the Marine Corps has asked that we put 10 so-called experts in a room and create a martial arts program for the Marine Corps. And I threw your name in the hat as one of the 10, which would you be willing to come at the time. I live fairly closer to Quantico, Virginia than I do right now. Literally just 4 miles outside the gate. So I said, sure. I'd heard these ideas before. I wasn't so sure that this idea was going to go anywhere. If folks who are familiar with the Marine Corps, they will have heard of something called a crucible, which during recruit training is one of the last big events that Marines go through. And they're actually given an eagle, globe, and anchor. Well, that event, the crucible, had to be fitted into the recruit training program. So the commandant at the time was Jim Jones, General Jim Jones. The previous commandant, General Charles Krulak, is a gentleman who had put the crucible in. So he had taken the Marine Corps training regiment, which is absolutely tight. You can't miss one training phase. It just moves along at a quick pace. General Krulak said, whoa, stop, I'm putting this crucible thing in here. Wedge it in there, guys. Aye, aye, sir. And then the next commandant comes along and says, now I want this Marine Corps martial arts program. We didn't even know what to call it at the time. General Jones remembered when he was a rifle company commander as a lieutenant in Vietnam. He recalled the site of a Korean base camp where everybody had a black belt, and they were trained in the morning, even if they weren't black belts. And the VC, who were always around our camps watching, they got the notion that, hey, these Koreans are really... So there was a psychological warfare thing going on. And many of those Koreans were very talented. But he saw the morale effect, the fitness effect, the esprit de corps. So later on, as he moved up through the ranks, he always had that image in his mind. But General Jones was not a martial artist. So he did the smartest thing to do, put a panel together. And I was one of 10. We had a number of really good martial artists there from all disciplines: judo, taekwondo, sambo, Russian sambo, shorin karate. We had weapons. We had a hopologist from the ancient Hopology Society. We had a philosopher. We had the boxing coach from the Naval Academy. And we all got in the room. We made this thing. And the key thing was to make sure that this was not going to be what we call a goby in the Marine Corps. We wanted to make sure this wasn't a general officer's bright idea. Sometimes it doesn't always work out. This thing worked out terrifically. The hardest part was to keep the commandant involved, because he had to force feed this into the Marine Corps. We had representatives from the recruit depots, San Diego, Paris Isle, who were basically saying, we cannot fit one more thing in. And of course the Commandant would say, well, except for this. So it worked. I'm still what they call designated an SME, a subject matter expert. I drop out to the program every now and then. Once we got this out of the chute, the key thing was to have good people in the toughest positions pushing us forward.